I also am a theme lead for the Northwest Rocky Mountain Regional Food Business Center. So I know many of you in various states. So I'm glad to see all of you here. And our purpose for being here is to learn about what's happening in the world of food hubs across our Northwest Rocky Mountain region, which is Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, and Colorado. And we are lucky enough to have really brilliant, fun, interesting people here who are really deeply involved in their food hubs in their states, which is Melissa Hempkin from Wyoming. I almost said Hawaii, from Wyoming. Libby Christensen from Colorado, and Charlie Michael from Mont. Charlie, I don't even know exactly which state you live in, but Charlie covers both Washington and Montana. So we will start by listening to what these folks have to say about their networks in their states. And one of the things that we thought was quite interesting was how very different our networks are and how very different the purpose of those networks are and how they show up on the ground. So Melissa, you are first off, and Martha is running these slides for us.
All right, thank you. So we're going to kind of set the stage here, how most people hear about Wyoming, right? It's because of Yellowstone. We get Yellowstone National Park, and we have Scaldings and Maulings there. But there's a lot more than the park in Wyoming, even though we generally explain where we live in the state in relation to where we live to the parks. But if we go to the next slide, we're going to look a little bit more of what is Wyoming and why is that important to thinking about food hubs. Another way, we get a lot of tourists, over 8 million tourists a year. They eat a lot of food while they're here, but we only have 500,000 people who live here year round. And so that is a challenge when moving food around the state. So we can head to the next slide there, Martha. And we have the Wyoming Drive. Instead of plowing or salting our roads, most of the time they're just closed. They're just closed. These are our interstates. I-80, of course, is pretty well known. It goes across the whole U.S. It gets closed generally about 50 days a year, which really impacts not only our food hubs in Wyoming, but also anybody trying to drive a semi-truck across the state. It could be for high wind. We get a ton of trucks just blown over. It could be because of ice or blizzards, or we just had a huge tunnel fire that happened, unfortunately. But that really impacts food hubs just going around Wyoming. We have a lot of mountain passes that are just closed. They're not even plowed during the year. So this is a huge consideration when we ever talk about what we're doing in the state and where we're going. Go to the next slide. The other thing to think about is who's doing what in the state and the economy that we have here. So this is the state of Wyoming report. They measure jobs and wages according to the price of a barrel of oil, both in the US and internationally. That is how tied our economy is to oil and gas. Very energy dependent. And so we're in this boom and bust cycle, of course, that is not just dependent on what oil and gas is being drilled here in the state, but also what's happening in Saudi Arabia and what's happening in international shipping. So this really impacts our communities and what people are doing in our towns and what they're able to do, and if they have a job, and if they have any money, and if they can buy food. And so this is very important. It's one thing we're looking to break by food, local food scene in particular, of like, hey, there's jobs here by growing food for yourself, and it's possible to do in Wyoming in our semi-arid high altitude climate. So that's kind of the background of where we're at there. Next slide, please, Martha. The other thing is, I mentioned we only got 500,000 people here, and we often get the joke, small town with long streets. A lot of folks know each other regardless of where they're at in the state, but we're very spread out. We only have 99 towns and cities, and that ranges from population 1, yes, they're considered a town, to 65,000 is our largest town, which really isn't that big compared to other folks who have some huge urban areas that are centers of food and food hubs, and then you have rural communities feeding into them. Well, we don't have any really urban areas at all. We are tied to Denver and Salt Lake, but they're not in our state. So that's something to think about as well. We have a ton of federal land and state land. So over half the state is public lands, which is more confining, or the parks are national forest. And then again, those tourists, they come from all over the place. We love them, but they also are a different part of our community. But there's quite a bit going on here. As you can see, I chose some photos to show. We've got some food hub activity, got lots of local food and a lot of community members involved in it. Next slide, please. One of the things we've noticed in the last few years, and this wasn't just because of COVID, we've seen a huge increase in farmers markets. There is in Fremont County and on the Wind River Indian Reservation where I live, there are 11 farmers markets in our county. Fremont County is the same size as the state of Vermont, but we only have 40,000 people that live here. So that's kind of that's pretty normal across the state, huge landscape and only a few people. But in 2023, we had a huge, according to the data that I pulled directly from our farmers market managers, some huge increase in sales, 29% increase in 2 years, which is $1.4 million. It's a lot of sales increases, a lot more producers coming online and a lot more folks buying local food products. And as you can see, 142% growth of more people wanting to buy local food and coming to farmers markets. And so that's been a huge influx for these small towns to have these farmers markets. And as they're looking at that, they're looking at having more farmers markets or year-round farmers markets and how to support that consumer demand, as well as all these producers that are coming online and growing local things. I love this photo that I put in there. This is from Dubois, Wyoming. Dubois is about 800 people in it. It's very much becoming a fourth, fifth home community. It's close to Jackson Hole, which is very well known. But this dude, I love him. He's there with his cucumber and his lettuce, but he does not look like a guy who eats salad, right? He looks like a steak guy. But maybe he's having steak and salad. I don't know. But there's more and more folks coming to local food, and I love it. That it's drawn in different people. It's not just the hippies, right? Next slide. Another thing is we have really just one food hub covering the whole state, which they started as on grant funding to start serving the entire state, which is a hard way to start. But they have had some amazing growth that has, of course, led to growth pains of how do you support all this demand coming in. They're not only managing eatwyoming.com, which is a collaborative online farmers market platform for anyone in the state. They're also doing wholesales and farm to school and trying to fill their vans as they travel around the state. But that huge increase, as you can see, 92% increase in just in eatwyoming.com sales in 2 years has been a stress on them as infrastructure and their capability to support it. But we're excited to continue to help support it because it's important to move things around the state, not only for our producers to gain sales channels, but also for customers to have more access. I mentioned we got really little towns, right? One person towns. They don't have a grocery store. They don't even have a gas station. And most of the time they might be an hour to 2 hours away from somewhere else. But Eat Wyoming Food Hub van might be driving through that Jeffrey City on its way to somewhere else and can stop and drop off food while they're going through. So it's really increased the local food access. The photo I showed you of the guy at the belt buckle and the cowboy hat, he's up in Dubois. Dubois is one of the towns with the most eatwyoming.com sales in the entire state. It's only 800 people. The reason it has that many sales is they have a very small grocery store that does not get very many deliveries from the main, Cisco, whoever's delivering to that grocery store. And the folks who live in that community year round have realized that eatwyoming.com is a great way to get food delivered to them. So they order online. The van has to drive through Dubois to go on its Wednesday route, and they just stop and drop off all their food orders. And so that's why Little Dubois is ranked up pretty high with the bigger towns in Wyoming as one of the highest sales towns. Next slide, please. Another thing that's kind of grown up in the last few years, we have Wyoming Food Freedom legislation here that allows direct-to-consumer sales of cottage foods and raw milk and all sorts of goodies that are made in home kitchens or on farm processed. And that has led to a lot of we start calling them food freedom markets pop up around the state because in that legislation, there's an allowance for a designated agent. So someone doesn't have to be at a farmer's market selling direct to their customer with their jug of raw milk. They can designate Fremont Local Market as their agent, and they can sell raw milk on the shelf in the refrigerator and not be present. And so this has really led to a bunch of local food consignment store models popping up. And here's a few of the ones across the state. They're all over the state. They're big to small. Some of them are in printers, like they're printing in the back, and they have a little fridge in the front. But it's bringing food and it's giving a sales channel to our producers at the same time. And then our food hub, like Eat Wyoming and some others, are networking with them to be pickup locations and drop off locations as they're driving around the state. And so it's been a great network for these to kind of pop up and serve their communities. Next slide, please. Oh, that's not the correct slide. Is there one with Meadowlark? There we go. So this is one of those. This is one of the Food Freedom Markets. Meadowlark Market and Kitchen is based out of Lander. They're a project of Slow Food Wind River, which is their nonprofit organization above them. They've been only open a year, but I asked them to share some of their sales data to kind of give you an idea of like, wow, there's been some huge growth. I ran real quickly through Eat Wyoming growth of the actual food hub. I ran real quickly through 11 farmers market sales growth in the last few years. So this is 1 year for Meadowlark Market. They had over $300,000 in sales in their very first year. 228K went directly back to farmers, ranchers, and food makers in the last 6 months. And this is over the winter, which is our slow growing season, right? We just got a lot of milk and meat going on right now. Not very many veggies. 30% increase in sales in the last 6 months and 12% increase in individual customers. And of course, they wanted to make sure they're the egg source right now. They want to let you know that right now. Eggs are in a little, nationwide shortage, but by golly, Meadowlark is selling like eggs from their local hens. So they want to make sure you all knew that. And so you can see, this is just one market, but the others are kind of doing the same thing, like huge up tick and things. And a lot of what Regional Food Business Center is looking at doing is how we can support that continued growth and make it really sustainable moving forward. So it's a really quick snapshot of what's going on in Wyoming.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm going to direct your attention, Melissa, to a couple questions that showed up in the chat, and then we will have Libby Christensen from Colorado.
Hi, everybody. And I do want to also highlight that there are some folks that are more Food Hub experts than myself in the chat. So Al Stone with Valley Roots Food Hub and Brian Kearney with Kitchen Sink Solutions are both been knee deep in Food Hub activity and supporting those businesses in ways that kind of me at the center with the extension office has not been as much in it. So I appreciated Melissa's slides because I also put a lot of maps in. Next slide, Martha. So first off, just want to introduce myself. I'm the statewide food and ag specialist with Extension. So my position is with Colorado State University. I support our extension specialist at the county level across the state. Originally worked primarily in our rural parts, everything outside the Front Range. But over the last couple of years, especially with the center, have been really diving more into the work happening along the Front Range and supporting that effort. I also did my doctoral research into food hubs, primarily around Sacramento and the Bay Area, looking at the development of the fresh fruit and vegetable industry and how there was a growing demand when I was doing my dissertation research in 2014 to 2016 about localizing food system and the dynamics that happen in California because it is such a mecca for fruit and vegetable growing, how there's unique tensions that lie in that space. Because if you go to a produce distributor, your broadline distributors, and you ask them, are you buying local? And they're like, well, it's of course, this is where everything is grown. And so that was kind of where I started and then moved over to Colorado, where it's a very different industry and space and production system. So I currently live in a community, we've got 59 frost-free days. So the idea of growing fresh fruits and vegetables is oftentimes quite constrained. And also there's very much a cultural assumption that you can't grow very many vegetables for commercial production in that space. And then I also own a distillery here in Northwestern Colorado. So getting more in this grains supply chains and understanding what those logistics might look like. Next slide, please. So similar to Melissa, I include lots of maps. I think especially looking at the food hub literature, so much of it is dominated by case studies and examples from our coastal communities and the Great Lake region. And so I think thinking through what does food hubs look like in the mountain region, and what are the unique constraints and realities of both the production systems, the physical landscape, and the humans that live and work in those landscapes is really important and unique, and something that I think is still kind of missing from some of the conversations. And that's one of the things that I'm excited about this conversation today. So similar to Melissa, in Wyoming, we've got very interesting kind of distribution of water in our state. We've got about 70% of the population is on the eastern side of the state. And 95% of our growth in population has really been concentrated in those areas. We're actually seeing depopulation in a lot of our eastern regions. So we have these communities that have long, rich histories of agricultural production, that have grocery stores, that might have meat processing, and they're losing their people. People are leaving those communities, or they're aging in a way that it's making it very difficult for those communities to kind of thrive and support localized food systems. On the western side, similar to Melissa, I don't know if we've got fourth and fifth homes, but we're definitely seeing folks with second and third homes in our communities. And that both the purchasing patterns of those individuals, what they're looking to buy, as well as the seasonality of their purchases, is very different than what we might be seeing in other parts of the country. These people come for maybe a couple of months, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe just for Christmas. And so when they're here, they want to buy a leg of lamb, a big pork butt to do a roast or something, but they don't necessarily need small quantity. It's a unique space. And then we have the issue of water in our state. So 80% of our water falls and flows on the west side of the state. So that's really where a lot of our fruit and vegetable production happens. We've got a couple of really robust fruit growing regions along kind of that Gunnison, Colorado River. And then a lot of our vegetable production is concentrated kind of in that Rio Grande space in the central south part of the state. Next slide. So in addition to kind of the agronomic principles of what you can grow where, we also have transportation challenges. Fortunately, our state, our roads don't close as frequently as Wyoming, but I think oftentimes we overlook, or there's assumptions about Colorado that we're divided in half, so that we're a perfect rectangle, and I-70 flows through the middle of the state and I-25 cuts through the half, and that's not the reality. I-25 is our transportation corridors are very much concentrated kind of in that north part of the state, but our interstate system the state-based larger highways are quite limited. And what we see is that a lot of our environmental justice communities are outside those major highways. And so thinking about how to connect them into a system is really challenging for our communities, and kind of especially on that Eastern Plains side. And then kind of also different and things that we're exploring now, we right now have a freight tax credit in northwestern Colorado. Is most of our communities don't have any rail connection. It's completely reliant on trucks. We have large mountain ranges with really high passes that go between these communities. And so even though they might be close as the crow flies, trying to get a truck from point A to point B can be really challenging. Next slide. And you can also see, if you think about that last slide about the environmental justice communities and where those transportation corridors lie, the darker counties highlighted here are our top agricultural producing regions, or top agricultural producing counties. You can see the top commodities that we kind of grow on the left-hand side of the slide. We are a beef state, similar to Wyoming. That is our major economic driver when it comes to agriculture. We finish out and process a huge number of animals in our state. It has a lot of influence on kind of how things are talked about in terms of agriculture in our state. But there are pockets of more diversified production around, but there's just this major concentration in this northeast corner of what's happening and what's going on. Next slide. And I just want to, these are kind of small and difficult to see, but I wanted to highlight two maps of our food hubs from 2024 and 2025. And so what you can see is that there has been more food hubs kind of pop up in the last year. The area that they cover has increased. There's increasing competition across or between these food hubs. And some of pockets of our state are still not covered by the food hubs. So we still see in northeastern Colorado an absence of entities that are supplying and working in those parts of our state, and that there's a growing concentration in kind of the Front Range area as well as to the southwestern corner. And that's creating interesting dynamics for how our food hubs can work together and the relationships across those spaces, and trying to figure out what are the specific niches and specialities of those food hubs. We had a USDA Regional Food System Partnership grant in the southwestern corner, working with a number of the food hubs to try and figure out how that hub and node network could kind of work out. But to date, there's been limited outcomes from that partnership, and talking to some of the partners that have been involved, just the need of coordination, and the work was really going on when there's really ramping up demand, increased resources passing through the federal and state governments, facilitating or increasing demand for local food systems. And there's a question about now that many of those resources are no longer available, what does the future hold, and how do folks work with those reduced amount of resources? I think that's the last slide I've got, and then I can put some sources and links in the chat if anybody needs them.
Thank you, Libby. And there we are. This is me. I'm the Oregon Food Hub Network. I am the coordinator of the Oregon Food Hub Network, which is housed at Oregon Community Food System Network and was started by Oregon State University Center for Resilient Agricultural and Food Systems, which is its new exciting name. And my role is currently funded by the Northwest Rocky Mountain Regional Food Business Center. Next slide. So our network is a peer learning community of local food hub projects around the state. Almost all of our projects are in rural areas, and we choose to take a really expansive definition of what a food hub is. Our participants do anything from traditional food hub activities like offering distribution or online marketplaces, but we also have shared kitchen facilities, some small scale co-packers, processors, and some mobile markets. Go ahead and move the slide forward. This is a map of our food hubs. These are actually only the most established food hubs. These are folks that have been around for a while, that have had actual operations for a while. But at last count, there are about 45 organizations all over the state that interact with our food hub network. And we estimate that they interact with about 80% of the counties in the state of Oregon. Next slide. We're a relatively new network. We were started by Lauren Gwynn and at OSU as a monthly call. In 2020, like many of the food hub folks here, our operations ramped up and became suddenly very, very important. In 2021 through 2023, we worked on our RFS, a Regional Food System Partnership Planning Grant. Sorry, I should have spelled that out. And then in 2024, we used the information that we gathered through that planning grant to advocate for ourselves with the Oregon legislature to support us. And the Oregon legislature chose to give us $1.1 million. In 2024, we partnered with Oregon Coast Visitors Association to do a very small, short-term trade network project. Libby, I think it might be a little bit like what you were looking at with your Regional Food System Partnership Grant. We did a little 6 or 7 month project to just test the waters. And then in 2024 and 2025, we used those legislature dollars to fund worker safety and infrastructure grants, as well as to expand our programming. Next slide. So out of the Oregon Coast Visitors Association project, this is one of the mapping outputs, and it's showing where we have routes and where we would like to have routes. The red lines are the would like to haves, and those actually mostly go into the less populated parts of our state. So it's not surprising that we don't have routes. The black lines are existing tried and true routes that our hubs are getting regional product onto somebody's vehicle. and moving it somewhere else, which for us was pretty exciting to be able to go from this group of folks that were talking about our various operations and talking about working together to actually creating action together and moving product around the state. Next slide. This is just one of our food hubs who has participated in that trade network project and is participating in the ongoing trade network project that I'll talk about a little bit more. Next slide. So using the legislature dollars, in addition to doing on-the-ground grants for worker safety and infrastructure, and those on-the-ground grants purchase things, anything from fatigue mats to, we actually purchased several trucks, a couple of walk-ins, some fairly large pieces of infrastructure throughout the state. We also kept some of that funding to expand our offerings as a network. And those offerings are a worker safety program, a staff training program, a high volume hub technical assistance program, and an extension of that trade network project. The worker safety program consists of site visits to individual hubs throughout the state. 8 to 10 hubs every year are getting a site visit and an evaluation, and then recommendations on how they can improve worker safety in their hubs. From that, we're building an annual webinar that talks about common issues that our worker safety professional is finding in the hubs. And then all of those resources are being made publicly available on the Oregon Food Hub Network website, along with a built-out worker safety program that details how you can start a worker safety program in your hub. Our staff training program included a need assessment, which led to offering conflict resolution training, paying for online leadership courses at the management center. And then we identified some shared program level staff needs, such as gaining familiarity with regulatory environments and just general leadership training. We discovered that a lot of our program level staff have never actually managed staff or people or projects before. So we invested some energy in helping them improve those skills. This year, we're expanding that training to include more hubs and more layers of management, including executive directors. We are gathering resources to create a Management 101 resource guide that will include templates, samples of job descriptions, check-ins, annual goal setting, and an employee handbook that can be customized for each hub. Food Hub Network member learnings and best practices for adding staff to your organization, including hiring, firing, onboarding, and internal communications and management. Like Melissa, a lot of our hubs, like Melissa's hubs, a lot of our hubs experienced some growth. And in addition to the infrastructure struggles that they experienced, they didn't have the human resources infrastructure to manage the new staffing levels. That was a real struggle for a lot of our hubs. And so we're investing some money into improving that for them. As well as we're looking at, developing some guides for best practices for workplace culture and workplace norms. Our high volume hub technical assistance program consists of having an assessment, which Tracy Harding, who's on this call, did that assessment for our hubs. We have 4 for-profit hubs within our network who also happen to be our highest volume sellers within our network, purchasers and sellers within our network. So Tracy Harding went to each of one of those hubs, did an assessment with them, and developed an action plan for them. This year, we're going to invest in more intensive one-to-one business development technical assistance. So we'll be purchasing some time with a fractional CFO to work with them on improving their books, getting their books more bankable, as well as building out a 3-year pro forma so that they can start achieving profitability and know what that looks like and know what the steps that they're going to take to achieve that. All of those programs will produce tools and templates, and those will become publicly available on our website, as well as our hubs will then be prepared. The hubs that are receiving this fractional CFO support are then paired one-to-one to offer mentorship with the smaller hubs within our network. Let's see, the last one, extension of the Trade Network project. So the Trade Network, which started by the Oregon Coast Visitors Association, We are extending with 2 separate cohorts within the state of Oregon, and that project will collect the relevant data and then create materials, templates, tools, and case studies for all of our hubs that will become, again, publicly accessible on our website. And then ultimately identify the routes that we as a state need to invest in that are most likely to be most viable and the correct cadence to operate those routes. Next slide. And that was my last bit of conversation. And this is yet another one of our hubs. This is Gorge Farmer Collective, who participated in Charlie Michael, who is our next speaker, Charlie Michael's conference that he ran last week. All right, Charlie, you are up, and I think you were going to run your own slides.
Yeah, I'll run my own here. If someone could just, in about 8 seconds, give me verbal confirmation that you can see these. Waiting for it. Can you all see these? Okay. Asked for verbal, but that works too. Thank you. Hey, everybody. My name is Charlie Michael. I'm the Cooperative Development Center Director at Mission West Community Development Partners. We are a community development nonprofit organization based in Ronan, Montana. Through our food, agriculture, and cooperative development programs, we lead efforts across Montana, northern Idaho, and Washington to create market opportunities for producers and to improve local food access for communities. In 2021, we obtained a 3-year USDA Regional Food Systems Partnership Grant Award, RFSP, an acronym that's come up a couple times today already, to support Puget Sound Food Hub Cooperative, Link Foods, and Western Montana Growers Cooperative by creating access to shared resources and coordination capacity to increase their regional market share. We named the project the Northwest Food Hub Network, and we built a work plan designed around 3 main objectives: accessing the personnel capacity that our hubs need to generate leads and drive sales, to expand each food hub's year-round supply availability, to design more seamless hub-to-hub coordination systems. Mission West used the RFSP grant to hire me as project manager and to support staff time for our food hub managers to drive the effort forward. At the same time, we engage kitchen sink strategies and local food marketplace to bring specialized capacities in sales and software development to help the network's food hubs to overcome barriers to market entry and to synchronize and streamline their supply chains. Our network's activities are carried out primarily through 4 working groups, which I convene and coordinate to provide a way for our food hub staff to work together to advance objectives that are relevant to their roles. These groups give me a window into what's going on at each hub to make sure that we're moving forward in alignment with their collective and independent goals while keeping the time commitment manageable for their staff. An area of focus for our network from the start has been to establish and expand our food hub's presence in institutional markets, which includes K-12 schools, healthcare, higher education, and corporate food service. In 2021, prior to the network's formation, our hubs combined to earn about $300,000 revenue from institutional sales, a number which grew to about $1 million in 2022 and has exceeded $2 million in both 2023 and 2024. Our partnership with Kitchen Sink Strategies helped our hubs early on to engage new customers, gather demand data, and to navigate new administrative and logistical complexities. Local Food Marketplace, meanwhile, worked hand in hand with our hub managers to design and implement improvements to their online sales storefronts, reporting tools, and inventory management systems. And of course, each of our food hubs brought its own foundational capacities to the table, including highly capable and experienced staff members, as well as the systems, fleet capacity, and infrastructure that it takes to fulfill high-volume wholesale orders. Since the launch of our network 3 years ago, I've seen a distinct mindset shift, evolution from our food hub managers from how will my food hub benefit from this to what new and greater opportunities can we create by working together. I feel this is really well illustrated by the collaboration among our hubs to win a series of local food for schools procurement contracts. Since the start of 2023, we've worked together to deliver more than 85,000 pounds of locally grown and raised grains, pulses, produce, and meat to schools across the region, earning close to $1 million in new revenue in the process. It's one thing to talk about collaborating. It's another thing to actually do it when a lot of money is on the line, and it's yet another to successfully execute it. Another demonstrative example of this is the development of our hub-to-hub regional supply chain, which now facilitates more than 100 inventory trading transactions each year to grow, diversify, and bring greater consistency to our product offerings. Gaining reliable access to goods from growers in Puget Sound's more temperate climate has provided a cost-effective way for Link and Western Montana Growers Cooperative to round out their catalogs during the lean winter months. Puget Sound Food Hub, meanwhile, has benefited from backhauling items like bison, lentils, asparagus, and stone fruit that aren't typically available in its immediate local area. This trading system is creating new market access opportunities for our producers and making it possible for our hubs to serve their most important customers all 12 months of the year. Since last spring, I've been working closely with our Food Hub managers and board members to build a durable framework to sustain and strengthen the network. We came together around this time last year to develop an MOU to establish the principles and practices that all current and future network members will uphold. It begins by stating that the network's member hubs are cooperative businesses jointly owned and democratically controlled by the local food producers who benefit from their services. It defines our cooperative identity, affirming that our food hubs adhere to the cooperative values, which include things like self-help, equity, solidarity, and social responsibility, and that we put those values into practice through the 7 cooperative principles. It explains how we promote access to high-quality, culturally relevant food by supplying source-identified products in alignment with the Good Food Purchasing Framework, which we use to demonstrate our commitment to supporting local economies, nutrition, a valued workforce, sustainability, and animal welfare. And finally, it details what it means to us to function as a food hub network, which includes aggregating, marketing, and distributing local food in a spirit of openness, transparency, and mutual accountability. The pillars of our approach include trading inventory to increase the volume, variety, and consistent of goods that we offer, sharing margins to keep products price competitive in their destination markets, and leveraging intermediate market opportunities and logistical efficiencies to maximize the value that we return to our producers while minimizing environmental impact. That's what I got.
All right. What questions do we have from the audience that we haven't covered in the chat? Are there questions in the audience that we haven't covered in the chat? And there's 2 pages of you on mine, so I think I'm not seeing any hands go up. One of the things that we wanted to talk a little bit about as a group was really getting into what the considerations that our networks have to pay attention to that are different from state to state and place to place, and how do you support those considerations? And I think, Libby, you were one that had some really important considerations that you had wanted to bring out, which I think had to do with the relationships. And then Lauren, I see you, and Al, I see you after that.
Yeah, and I think that was partly what we were trying to, or what I was trying to bring up with some of the maps, is just the physical context in which you're operating, and then also seeing how efforts in the past haven't been successful. And I think partly to Al's question, Charlie, do you feel that part of the success for y'all's network is this shared organizational structure of cooperatives as a foundational organizational structure that then could be the foundation to build this larger entity? Because I think, and Al, I think you could probably speak to this more, but we had an effort to bring together a number of food hubs, but their organizational structures were so different. Their values and their goals in some ways were very different. Some of our food hubs that we see in our community are so geographically bounded that the idea of bringing in product from another state somehow threatens, or a different part of our state threatens the priorities that they've set forth. So I think my question can kind of lean into Al's question, I guess. But Al, I'll let you speak for yourself.
Yeah, that's, I guess, my main question. We've been at this trying to collaborate work for as long as I've been at our food hub, for 5 years, and just running into so many roadblocks. Not being on the same software. Is that necessary? We are switching over to a local food marketplace, but still to this day, not all of those food hubs are on that same software. But I think that the main ethos is that, yeah, there is this kind of lack of transparency, and just kind of high competition, high territorial boundaries of well, we deliver there, because we are like, we know the landscape. We could not serve only the San Luis Valley of Colorado and be in business. So we all have to compete out of our locales. And then we're seeing, you know, the funding for local food purchasing for food banks is no longer. So we all have to like get creative. And yeah, so I'm really wondering, and we have a new general manager, and we are kind of, you know, trying to get everyone at the table again, to really have these conversations and say, hey, what do we want to like actually strengthen and like work together? Or do we want to like watch each other like eventually dry up and not exist anymore? So I'm wondering, like, is it beneficial, or do you think it is possible that we are, because we all, like, one of us is an LLC, one of us is under a nonprofit, one of us is a SB Corp, and then there's newer ones popping up as well. And then we see in the, you know, Colorado is big, just like your region, but the eastern side, there's really nothing. There's nothing in like the northeast side, and then there's really nothing in the eastern plains of Colorado. And so how do we work together to serve those areas? Yeah, so that was like long-winded, but
I'll take one piece of it, and then I'll call on Charlie to take on another piece of it. For our network, from really the outset, we chose transparency as a core value. So anything that happens in our network, anything that is paid for by our network, becomes a shared resource. And so we as a group don't consider ourselves in competition. We consider ourselves in collaboration with, which is a mindset. And if it's not one that you have in your network, that can be a challenge to overcome. And I've definitely seen some places where that's been a problem, but that's always one of our stated outsets. So when I offer to pay for something, in fact, this happened just this morning, I offered to pay for some training for someone. And part of what that organization needed to give back to me was any tools, templates, and ancillary material that was created out of that training needed to be shared with the Oregon Food Hub Network, and then would become a public document. I'll anonymize a business, but anything that we get becomes public. And the expectation is, when you participate in the network, is that not only do you show up and you take and you receive what is learned, but then you also turn around and share back into that system. And then I think, Charlie, you might be able to speak more to the operational questions that Al was having around, you know, do we really care about, you know, the platform that we're using to order with?
Yeah, I'll try to be pretty succinct here. I think first of all, I'll say that I cannot possibly imagine a network, our network evolving in the way that it has, and our hubs collaborating as closely as they have without them being cooperatives. I think it's completely essential. I think that we are at a stage where we are, our hubs are involved in significant business to business relationships. They're buying and selling from one another at a high degree of frequency, and that comes with real trade-offs. We're no longer putting any grant resources into this project. This is just a self-sustaining partnership, and every time they share a margin, every time they work together on a bid, someone is sacrificing for one of the others. And if there's examples of that elsewhere in the food hub world in the country happening, I would love to see it. I hope that I'll see it, but I haven't seen it anywhere where it hasn't been cooperatives working with cooperatives. Another related dimension of that is that because I'm the Cooperative Development Center Director at Mission West, we're a USDA designated rural cooperative development center. So we had pre-existing relationships with these businesses. We weren't coming in and just saying, hey, everybody, let's do a food hub network. We actually helped start Western Montana Growers Cooperative almost 25 years ago and have worked with them deeply every year since. And so high degree of trust.
And I texted the number. Come on, Docs, you want to go outside? Texted.
High degree of trust among the hubs, I feel, is really essential. And then the last thing I'll say is that tech systems being aligned, certainly important, but I mean, we've been working hard on getting our local food marketplace platforms to communicate with one another better for years, and there's still a lot to be worked out there. I think way more important is each food hub having some foundational capacities in place, as I highlighted in my presentation. I'm very adamant that it's hard. It's hard to have a transactional inventory, flows between hubs. That's that style of a food hub network. If the food hubs are not able to stand on their own, it has to be something you're adding on top of a fundamentally sound business. I think there's a lot of other things that food hub networks can do without that being the case, but for us, that's been essential. That it has to be the case that none of our food hubs are really dependent on the trading. It's a bonus. It's something that helps them and boosts them and has helped them level up into a new market.
Did that sort of answer your question, Al?
Yeah.
It's a big question. How do you make people work together? Magic.
Al, you guys have a great cooperative development center there in Colorado, out of Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. So I think you just have to do a bunch of business conversions and then the network's gonna go gangbusters.
Other questions in this group? I think there might be one at the bottom. Do other folks have questions in this group?
This is Dawn, and I was just
Yeah.
wondering, Oregon obviously has a really inspirational model here in the fact that the state, the local food purchasing programs are great, but and for the most part, those were federal pass-throughs. Although in Colorado, we did have state money augment those to make those even bigger monies. But that's relying on specific policy levers that even have specific market channels. I think this model of Oregon as a state, investing in it almost like it is truly a piece of infrastructure, which it is. That's a case study to be written up so that those of us who are in states with food policy councils could bring them as examples of what other states could do who want to continue to because again, Colorado clearly has signaled something when they augmented the federal block grant monies. But if you think about that, that's still almost too transactional to steal a word Charlie used. And what you really need is this underlying infrastructure support that it sounds like Oregon has given to the food hub networks that's there to navigate that gnarly stuff you and Charlie just mentioned how to be navigated across the hubs. Because then even no matter how well intentioned a regional food system partnership grant like Colorado has is just there's just too in short of a timeline to work out all the things you have to work out in that. So I think if it's written up anywhere, or I guess I give it as a challenge, if that could be written up as a case study of what a state did to support the infrastructure needed to have these things work, that in addition to this thought of using a food co-op development center as a hub for hubs, those are both really good case studies that I think are not well known. So not a
Thanks,
question, more a
Dawn.
comment, like someone write a case.
I like your comments.
I would
Well,
add to
another-
Don's comment a little bit. It reminds me of Feeding America Network, where there's obviously food banks, but then there's also the Feeding America Network that provides resources for those food banks in order to do their jobs better. So when Sydney, you were giving your presentation, that reminded me of that specifically.
Well, thanks, Gina. Melissa, when we were doing our pre-meeting, we talked a little bit about the importance of our strategic partnerships. And I think you had some really great examples with your freedom markets, but also how those freedom markets have then become these additional nodes and that there's other partners in the state that are participating. Can you talk a little bit about how important those partnerships have been and what those partnerships have looked like for growing your food hub and now your little sort of mini food hub network?
Yeah, the the mini food hub network, maybe I'll start there. So with one, we have a couple food distributors around the state, but they're all on the east side, which we have some of our bigger cities are over on the east side of the state. But Wyoming is one of the ones that kind of tries to serve the whole state, which has spread them pretty thin because we're a big state. But with that, they really have kind of shown that, and the food bank as well has seen this from their side of moving product around the state. There's a lot of places that's hard to get to, generally because there's less roads to get there. That we don't have very many roads here, or there's not many people there. So then you're like deadheading, and it's just you're not taking very much in your vehicle, and then it's a little bit more costly to serve that area. And so a lot of conversation has looked like how can we serve those very rural, more outpost remote areas, but do so in an efficient manner, and how can we collaborate more? And it's been identified that both Eat Wyoming and the Food Bank of the Rockies, which is serving both Colorado and Wyoming, their areas overlap. It's Southeast Wyoming. It's, it's the same spot. And then in that conversation is looking at how we can take these food freedom markets that have popped up and utilize them as a little spots in the communities, because they already have local food producers coming to those locations to sell local food retail. And then how can we have the Food Hub network plug into that, where they're picking up product or dropping off product or bringing in product that market doesn't have from local producers. So it's a more diverse, nutritionally balanced offering to the customers that are coming there for their food needs. So that's been a lot to keep up with the increase in sales. You saw there's some amazing jumps the last few years. That has been awesome, but also a little mind-boggling to support as a structure, but also how to now bring that into a strategy. Not all the food freedom markets I listed on there are large. Some of them are just a fridge, as I mentioned. And so how to support them, where does their host business want to take it? What are their goals, and then how many producers are around and what they can do there. There are some organizations that are doing a little bit more. I mentioned in the comments that Meadowlark Market and Kitchen out of Lander, it has now become the long title is Western Wyoming Regional Food Hub for Eat Wyoming. The basics is, though, they've got a walk-in cooler in freezer, and they have a driver that lives over here in Fremont County, and we've got a reefer van. And now they're starting to do a little bit of a piggyback hopscotch, where driver comes in from Casper, 2.5 hours away, picks up stuff, drops off stuff for the other driver, who's now going another 2.5 here, another 2.5 there for hours of driving and getting product moved around. And some more of that is infrastructure that we need to kind of move things around.
Thanks, Melissa. Amy had a question. Amy and Mateus had a question. She would love to hear what the presenter's advice would be to give to entrepreneurs and cooperative groups wanting to start a food hub in their community. I did a little bit of casual answering in the chat, but I bet that Charlie and Libby would have something to say about what they've observed in their states as well.
I can say something real quick. I think about from like the development side right now, I'm working with a group that sort of noticed what was going on up in the Northwest and took an interest and wanted to get involved and start their own food hub. This group is based down in northern Idaho. And I think the success factors, they've successfully now gotten through a month of essentially doing like pilot distribution runs. And we basically just started this conversation 4 or 5 months ago about like they want to do this and they want to work together. And I really felt that having a specific model to look to and emulate in our food hubs, specifically we looked a lot at the development trajectory of Western Montana Growers Cooperative was really valuable, so they didn't feel like they were reinventing the wheel. We also spent a lot of time on just like group formation, trust building, transparency, building out a shared like fresh list product catalog for everyone to look at together with pricing, and then having a really transparent conversation about barriers that we might foresee around like product quality, packing, distribution capacity, and then ultimately moving forward just with what we were really calling like reversible experiments in distribution. And so kind of trying to figure out like, well, let's try something, let's assess it, see how it goes, have like a good core set of partners at the table to support us, and then we can continue to kind of iterate on that. And so that group has been really successful, and we are hoping that over time they will develop and evolve and be able to really plug in more significantly with support from the Northwest Food Hub Network supply chain.
And then the only thing that I would really add is a little bit about Lauren's point, but really ask about why. Why do you want to start a food hub? I think that there's so many organizations across the state or across the country that are like, I need a food hub. And then you start asking why. And then you're like, well, could someone else do that? Is somebody already offering that service? What about that offering is something that you could carve out that's unique to your space? What's the appropriate scale for you to offer that service? I think I've been working a lot with folks in southwestern Colorado, and goes to kind of the point about the territoriality, I guess it would be the word. It's like we only want to serve our community with our food products, and that for some parts of our state is, most places, is not a sustainable business model. And so a food hub is not the solution to that problem. Maybe doing a grow and share might be a better solution to what you're trying to accomplish. And I think sometimes the label or terminology of a food hub can be can hide or muddy up the goal or intention of the entity. And for a while it was such a catch-all and was big and sexy, and people thought that they could get funding if they attached that to what they wanted to do. And so a lot of what I do is really discourage that, like thinking through, like, do you really need one? What are you trying to accomplish? Can you partner with existing entities? Because our state has a lot of them, and they would benefit from more stuff.
Thanks, Libby. I 100% agree with Libby's. Do you really need this? A lot of folks show up and are really, really excited about infrastructure, and they think they need a bunch of really expensive infrastructure to move one crate of carrots. And that is not true. They do not need that infrastructure for that. We've got a couple more minutes. Shana, I'm going to get to your question, and then if we have time, Melissa, I'll come back to you.
I'll be quick. It's more of a statement. Just the value of backhauling, especially with getting unique items to a bigger market, I think is absolutely huge and pivotal. I worked with Valley Roots with backhauling some of the Ute Mountain corn up to the Food Bank of the Rockies, and that was huge for us to get it up to Wyoming. So that shows going, from the bottom of Colorado all the way up into Wyoming, and we couldn't have done that without Valley Roots. And then also just wanted to mention that, a lot of distributors face a lot of the same issues with covering different parts of states. And oftentimes that requires them, like for the Colorado standpoint, having to come from Utah over to the Western Slope, for example. So they're not things that are unique to food hubs. So it might be worthwhile to look beyond food hubs into the larger distribution issues.
Thanks, Shana. We have one more minute. I know most of you, a lot of you have to go at 12:30 or 12:30 Pacific Standard Time. Sorry. Most of you are on Mountain. Melissa, you looked like you had something you wanted to bring to the group.
I was just going to mention, so Libby, Colorado has so many food hubs. We're the opposite. We don't have enough. But how can we have that strategy so we don't become super redundant as we're trying to fulfill all the need that we're seeing by the amazing growth? So I think we're, we can learn a lot from Colorado of like, hey, let's think smart instead of just every town starting something new and getting a reefer van to support their need in their one town. Because then we will not be able to support each other because we won't have enough business for one to be successful. So it kind of comes back to working together to have a strategy across the state so that everyone is growing together, but everyone is getting a good service and products are flowing for producers and customers. And that comes through a lot of conversation.
Thanks, Melissa. Y'all, thank you so much for joining us. We are at the top of the hour, or at our hour. I just dropped my email in the chat. Al, if you want to reach out, feel free. Anybody else who wants to reach out, please do feel free, and we'll get you connected to the right folks. Thank you all for coming. I hope this was worth your time and energy. I really enjoyed doing it. Take care.